Tou SaiK, Lee is a hip-hop lyricist from St. Paul, Minnesota. He is currently writing a memoir entitled My Grandmother Can Freestyle in honor of his artistic collaboration with his late grandmother, Yua Chang. That collaboration is encapsulated in a poem entitled Generation After Generation. Lee writes, the poem helped him realize the value of intergenerational collaboration across many cultures. Tou's grandmother, Yua Chang, passed away in 2017, and since then, Lee says he plans to partner with elders to facilitate interactions with elders and youth to create performance art. Lee is also the founder of Street Stops and Mountaintops, a project that connects teaching artists from the U.S. to Hmong children in Southeast Asia. Welcome to.
Hi, what's going on?
So, well,
glad to be here.
Thank you. We are so glad to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about your current project? What is it that you're working on?
Yeah, so the memoir, My Grandma Can Freestyle, it's me really reflecting on our collaboration, our intergenerational collaboration, I should say. We performed together for 10 years. It was the first of its kind. I could claim to be the first hip-hop artist to collaborate with my grandmother. And it was also intercultural, where my influence of growing up around spoken word poetry, written creative writing, to hip-hop, collaborating with her influences of this Hmong poetic art form called Gutia, which comes from an oral tradition where she did not write her poetry. She either memorized poems that were passed on to her, or she had to improvise her poems. And that's where the title of My Grandma Can Freestyle, because I was really fascinated by my grandma's ability to memorize without writing, just by listening, and her ability to just improvise. And so that's kind of how that came up. Through our 10 years, there was a lot of very interesting, amazing, and dynamic stories, and I just wanted to collect all these stories and put it into a memoir. So that's the basis of. Plus grandma, through those 10 years, she had a lot of fans. Like, she had a lot of people that followed our collaborative, who were supporters of her as an artist. And it's great because a lot of Hmong elders, they don't, these art forms they've been learning since they were children, right? And not all of them get fully appreciated for these art forms, because for them it was a part of everyday life. And so since performing with me, she has gained a lot of following, I should say, a whole fan base. And I think it's also a gift to give back to all her fans that have supported her over the years.
How did this collaboration with your grandmother start?
There was a gathering of Hmong artists to be a part of this opportunity to perform for a program called Voices of Exile through Pangea World Theater with Deepankar and Meena. And they wanted Hmong artists to collaborate with each other. So they wanted, maybe across different genres or across different, they didn't actually speak on the generational thing yet. I kind of put the generational idea into play, where after having that discussion and meeting all these amazing artists, I decided that I would perform with my grandmother, and that would be my collaborative artist I would perform with. And then I went home, or to my parents' house. I knocked on her door and I asked Grandma, I asked her in Hmong, would you perform with me we have this show coming up, and she said, just tell me where to be and I will be there to perform. And so that just started this collaboration, this intergenerational collaboration, and we called it Fresh Traditions.
Did your grandmother surprise you at that first performance?
I would say all my surprises came before the performance. I actually didn't know enough about this Hmong traditional art form. So while trying to practice with her, I learned about the whole, like, she can improvise, she has memorized these poems that were passed on to her, and that what her poems were about, like breaking down the messages. So for me, it was this whole learning experience of deepening my cultural identity and understanding, and also coordinating how we would go back and forth. So she told me the words for like verses and stanzas, which I didn't know yet. And through that experience of just practicing with her and rehearsing, that's where I learned a lot. Like, I gained a lot of knowledge about Hmong culture, which, you know, I had some knowledge, but I feel like connecting with my grandma really helped deepen my cultural identity and have me understand my culture better. As far as performing, I would say that we were ready to do our collaboration, but I think it was more the audience. I realized how significant of a moment that was after we collaborated by the reaction of the audience to our performance. I think the audience was really surprised, and in a very positive way. And I felt like we were just creating this movement together. Yeah.
To tell me, do you have like a favorite, like in that time that you spent performing with your grandmother, can you share with us perhaps one of your favorite stories from that time, or something that you learned during that time?
Yes. So during our time performing together, we were booked to perform at UW Milwaukee, so University of Wisconsin Milwaukee, by Dr. Chia, who was a faculty, or who's still a faculty there. And it was a great opportunity because we were performing for the Hmong community in Milwaukee, as well as a lot of the student community and faculty there. I went a few days before because I was working with students at UW, or not UW Milwaukee, but in the Milwaukee community at some of the high schools. I was working with some of those students, and then they would present their poems for this final event at the end of the week. And that's when they would fly in Grandma to perform with me because they wanted to feature Grandma and I. And so on that evening, there was a lot of great performers. There was the hip-hop group called Rare from Milwaukee, who was this Hmong hip-hop group. And then there was students who were performing songs, and I collaborated with a few students. And then Grandma and I were announced, and we performed for this audience, and it was just a very fantastic experience. So after the performance, I looked over where Grandma was, and she was just surrounded by fans and by students, and they would, you know, some of the students would say, "Oh, you remind me of my grandma." And so Grandma leans over to me. Oh, and then around me, there was only like 4 or 5 people. So she had all the fans. You know, she had around like 20 people, and I had like 4 or 5 people, which is fine.
Naturally.
Because Grandma has to have her, you know, she's been doing it for so many years. She has to have her fan base. So she leans over and asks me to write my phone number on this little piece of paper that she pulled out of her like purse. So I said, okay. So I wrote it down, and then we went back home to St. Paul. And like the next day, I get this phone call, and it's just like a 414 area code, which is Milwaukee. And I pick up the phone, and I'm like, "Hello." And she's like, "Hey, your grandma told me to call you. And I was like, what? Why is that? And she was a student in Milwaukee, and she said, your grandma told me that you're looking for a wife and that I need to call you to get to know you. And I was like, whoa, what? Grandma's trying to hook me up. And then we just had a conversation. And then the next day after that, I had another phone call from another student. But this student already was in a relationship. She was just like, grandma told me to call you. I already am in a relationship, but I'm just fulfilling my promise to your grandma. And then there was a third person too. And I was like, grandma's spreading my number out. She really wants me to get married. And that's when I realized she's always looking out for me. She's always looking out for me. And it was like 10 years later till I actually met my wife, who was my current wife. And so grandma got to meet and she's been trying for 10 years, but she finally got to meet the woman that would be my wife, Tou SaiK. And so I'm sure she was really happy before she passed to meet that I was finally in a relationship. Well, a relationship that became a marriage, I should say.
Did you want to perhaps read something from your memoir, and then we can chat some more about what that might bring up?
Sure. This story is one of the stories I would say that really introduces our collaboration, our intergenerational collaboration. So it was the first night that Grandma Zhuocha, who had just arrived to the United States from Laos several years prior, came to see me perform spoken word. She walked with a hint of a limp, which she later explained came from pieces of shrapnel lodged in her left leg from a landmine that was left behind after the Secret War. Dad had to guess her age when doing paperwork to sponsor her over to this country, since she was born in a village during a time when Hmong were not required to document birth dates. I plan to perform a piece of my journey to find cultural identity for a community event at Harding High School in St. Paul. The MC announced, next to the stage is a guy who grew up on the east side and is going to perform spoken words for us. Give it up for Tou SaiK Lee. I stepped center stage, adjust the mic. First of all, spoken word, there's no need for an S. Thank you for inviting me to perform. I also grew up in the Frogtown neighborhood, where my brother and I created a lot of hip-hop songs in our group called Delicious Venom. Now I do spoken word. This poem is called Generation After Generation. For those who were raised in the United States, we refer to Hmong elders as OGs, which for us stands for older generation. While I spoke poetry, I squinted at the lights that came across the room and noticed rocking shadows in the auditorium. I felt like I needed to take my trusty sunglasses out of my pocket and rock it inside the building to block out the sunshine or the shine from the lights and perform with my eyes closed. I continued to articulate. I heard snaps, claps, and foot taps from students in the first few rows. I started losing my native language when I started going to school. At the time, I believe I spoke Hmong at the level of a small child. I just started relearning my language after high school. After the applause, I leaned over to say thank you, Wo Chao. I removed my shades and strolled backstage towards Grandma while she waved to me. She was wearing the furry snow leopard hat I gave her as a gift last December. I remember when Mom scolded me on why I would buy Grandma something meant for teenagers. Grandma still wore the stuffed animal over her head since this day and never complained. Grandma laughed deep and heartily like Santa would have. I noticed that she laughs a lot, and not always when something was funny. She laughed when my dad yelled at her for saying inappropriate words around us children. She laughed after surviving a car accident, which she swears all passengers were protected by a special ring on her middle finger. She laughed at the flat screen when The Rock hit Mankind with a metal folding chair while in the ring. Some get offended by her laughing at awkward moments, but I understand. I do that too. She said in Hmong, "Tou, I don't know what you said in English, but it seems like what you do is just like what I do." My parents mentioned to us that Gutsia is a traditional art of poetry chanting that Hmong have been doing for generations. I never really understood this art's tradition that the OGs do. I haven't felt like I could relate to it until this moment when Grandma said those words to me after my performance. I realized that this could be a continuation of an oral tradition. What I do in spoken word can honor what she does with Gutsia. I think it would be epic to collaborate with Grandma. My dad told me that her generation didn't have the opportunity to go to school. She was a farmer all her life, so she could not read or write. Even so, she was able to recite poems that were 5 to 10 minutes by listening and memorizing, line by line, stanza by stanza, verse by verse through repetition. We only started performing for audiences after the war ended. Grandma and I sat at the kitchen table to have some of her tofu soup made from soybeans. She got the hookup from her OG friends at the Eastside Farmers Market. She revealed how she has skills to improvise lines that rhyme. Grandma rattled off a few lines of poetry in Hmong and ended her flow with St. Paul. She just gave a shout out to St. Paul. For sure, these lines were not from Laos. Wow, I was amazed my grandma can freestyle.
Thank you so much, Tou. It's really beautiful. So for you, would you say this collaboration with your grandmother was part of a personal language revitalization project?
Yes, I think it was language and culture and history, I would say, because I feel like I learned a lot about the history of this art form, and that she was using words that were from when Hmong people were in China, like 6 generations before, and that's how far back one of her poems was passed on. And so yes, there was definitely language revitalization. Yes.
And so, as you have worked as a hip-hop lyricist now for so many years, how has that experience translated into the work that you're doing presently?
Well, all my poems and my lyrics have been in English for the first 15 years of my writing and artistic performance career. Right? And during my journey with Grandma and having the opportunity to travel to villages in Southeast Asia and live with the Hmong people there, it really inspired me to write in my native language. And now I have a hip-hop album called Ndiet Te Kong Te, which translates to Unified Worldwide, and it references how Hmong are in a diaspora after refugee resettlement, as well as the Hmong that has spread throughout Southeast Asia and China. For me, it's thinking about our identity in that way on a worldwide scale, and also being inspired by indigenous people, native hip-hop artists here in the United States, such as Culture Shock Camp, and being inspired by other artists after me, such as Tall Paul, and utilizing native language and culture in our music too.
Yeah, shout out to Culture Shock Camp and shout out to Tall Paul.
Yeah.
Have there been other influences in the St. Paul or the Twin Cities hip-hop scene that shaped who you are as a hip-hop lyricist over the past decade and a half?
Yeah, most definite. Well, I just wanted to reference one more thing about the native influence. Mm-hmm. It was because I observed the native community utilizing hip-hop as a way to revitalize language, culture and history. And so that's where I got the inspiration to utilize hip hop in that way also. And so it was great that there is such an influential community here in the Twin Cities of Native artists. Thinking about here in the Twin Cities, I would say Toki Wright was one of the first hip hop artists that reached out to us, along with Hugo Wong, and really gave us opportunities. When I say us, I mean my brother and I, who were in a hip hop group together called Delicious Venom, like around the early 2000s to the mid 2000s. And a lot of our influence initially were artists like Tupac Shakur, and for my brother, for Snoop Dogg, or like mainstream artists. But once we got connected to the Twin Cities hip hop community, our influences were like a Toki Wright and a Guardians of Balance, Illuminous 3, and these were artists that were, I mean, we were around the same age too, but we were inspired by them, you know, because we were all coming up around the same time and performing at events together. Definitely influenced by artists like Brother Ali also, and addressing social issues through our music. And so, yeah, that's are some artists that I can think of for now. I'm sure there was plenty more, but those are the first artists that popped to mind.
And what kind of conversation, if hip-hop can be said to be a kind of conversation between artists and audiences, what kind of conversation are you hoping to have with your audiences?
I think I want to reference my past before I talk about my future, right?
Sure.
In the past, I feel like we were just trying to have a voice and represent the Hmong perspective, my brother and I, Delicious Venom. And that's why we were very welcomed by the hip-hop, independent hip-hop community here in the Twin Cities, because at that time we were the only ones representing our perspective and this huge Hmong community and population here. And being that there have been various Hmong rappers and hip-hop artists throughout the years, but not all of them have merged and connected with the Twin Cities community at large. My brother and I felt like that was our role, I don't want to call it role, but our responsibility, I should say, to represent our people and our perspective. And a lot of hip-hop artists came to us and said, I have a better understanding of the Hmong people and the Hmong history through your music. And so for us, that was really important. Now at this point, being a teaching artist, going into schools and helping students write their own songs for 10 years myself, I'm really into writing songs that continually have strong messages, but also thinking about this piece of cultural identity and cultural connection, and just utilizing my art to engage with young people in a way where they can like think about different ways to be inspired to write different messages, but then also deepening their cultural identity through music. And so my music comes with curriculum, for example, maybe because I'm naturally a teacher and a mentor. So for me, that's kind of where I'm at, is I've been creating curriculum that goes along with my music. So when I release my album, I want to engage with schools and also to travel and take this album to villages. So that's what I'm looking to do with this new project. Yeah.
So part of the premise of Sanctuary, so it's really two things. Artists provide sanctuary to others just through their work. Yes. People, in fact, they might never meet, but also artists need to be supported in the work that they do and be provided some sanctuary in order, to give back and for that reciprocity or that exchange to happen. I'm wondering what you feel are some of the biggest supports that you've benefited from. And then I want to ask a follow-up question about that.
Honestly, I feel very fortunate to have grown up here in the Twin Cities. And before I moved, because our family moved here from Syracuse, New York, which I had great memories in Syracuse too. It really shaped who I am today from the East Coast. But when I turned 12, my family and we moved to Minnesota. And ever since then, there has been opportunities to... well, at first it was really rough because we lived in the Frogtown neighborhood and there were gangs and there was a disconnection to cultural identity. But after that storm, and it gave me the inspiration to want to give back to community when I got older, when I got to college. And that's where there were opportunities, because there are nonprofit organizations, youth programs, also opportunities to visit schools where teachers were very supportive of having hip hop artists go into their schools. I was approached after one of my performances while I was in college. I performed at Intermediate Arts in this program that showcased spoken word poets, and an elementary school teacher approached me and asked me to visit her class. And at that time, I've never visited a school before, especially visited a school doing spoken word and hip hop. And through that experience, though, because I was still learning what to do, it was, I would say, probably 6 years later, those students approached me in high school and said that was an inspirational moment for them. One of the students, Chili Lord, became a spoken word poet and an activist herself, right? And so that was very meaningful, and I didn't realize how much impact I would have had, especially being that was my first school visit ever. But continually visiting schools and understanding the impact that it can make on students, and really seeing that something that I would have wanted growing up too. Maybe I would have started sooner on my artistic path. But in any case, Minnesota has created that opportunity for me. Like, for example, when my brother and I were performing together, we were doing songs about like human rights issues in Laos that were affecting Hmong people. We were doing songs about how I have a song called Get Justice about how Hmong people were misrepresented in the mainstream media, right? We were like, it's going back to, we had a voice, right? And now that I'm writing songs in Hmong, I'm utilizing that platform to say, let's address issues in our community. Let's address issues of gender, where Hmong women were perceived in a specific role in the past, but now they're stepping up in positions of leadership. They're becoming, CEOs, politicians, teachers, and we should appreciate that, and we should really value how Hmong women have stepped up and took these leadership positions now, right? So I have a song about that. I have a song about when I was rapping in English, talk about being poor and struggling and growing up in the hood. But now in Hmong, I'm critiquing the Hmong people that are now successful and doing better, but then they look down on people that are still poor, that are still struggling. I'm like, no, that was us 30 years ago. So we should empathize with those that are still struggling versus looking down on them. Just because you did better doesn't mean you should forget where you came from. So that's, for me, that's my growth of where my music is. Yeah.
Speaking of, the new album and some of that new growth, but I will ask you if you want to perform something for us here on Sanctuary.
I would like to perform 32 bars.
32 bars.
The reason why is because I'd like to do one in English and one in Hmong. Okay.
Yeah.
And I've been talking about those two, parallels of, where I've been at rapping in English as well as where I'm going rapping in Hmong. So I wanted to represent both. All right. I speak for the weak at the peak of my energy to seek motivation for underdogs to rise. Rap lottery gotta be the hot ticket, clocks ticking on trends spreading like disease. No hospital, poetry was the antidote. This is a tradition we chose not to diss. This is a religion, the words to reminisce. This is how we live in with letters we put in order. The poor man's version of a rich boy rapper. I rep it to the fullest so you never see me rocking jewelry. True MC, reppin' Minnesota. Never need to front wearing cubic zirconia. Cold with a soul that's brolic and swole. Never let it go, got it locked like a prison. Working class superheroes bend bars of steel. Still gotta hustle hard to win, lose, or keep it real. 被梦中有了被叫那寂寞夜 bóng cá错lệnh有故事冒险 被摸大忙这点特别他 khẩn giờ khâu lang ngờ khâu đuột ta là mua bê cho họ chờ mua tu sa là thổ bê chỉ mua đã chìm bầu ly cha vô xuyên đề ý cho ra mua chỉ kê vì mua cái rong gâu nhau hậu cho cái chân nhẹ lúc nên plua giờ đã chỉ có xá ly cha nhẹ thế gì ô hơ lử mi nhổ ô lái ta giờ có nhau hậu chạy lộ lo có giờ cho mi nhổ dù hậu do sầu trong giờ bê giờ mong hồng địa tế trở ly sợ đợi giờ chúa dòng ô tế mong blê cho nu cho xong có bố một phong dư cả nhau có ý xa có bố một trái nền thuộc cả xa là cả ba có bờ rong xia giờ chỉ mua nhân đầu giờ chỉ mua đã chỉ ta kỳ có bờ nhỏ đầu có bờ bố bê mong chỉ tay chân đầu dầu nhỏ hồ mong cái cử ý chữ mong cái tờ trả cho lên cho giả lô chỉ nhẹ lô chỉ cả dây mù đê là sẽ chỉ tàu bê nhỏ lúc nền cho nhẹ giờ linh đỡ bê sợ đời giờ lọ qua cái nó mong dây đê giờ mua thiếp lùa chỉ vô lý cả nó mong dây đê vì mua cái rong gâu nhỏ hậu cho cái cho nhẹ.
As my younger counterparts in the culture would say, that was fire. Thank you so much for performing here in studio. I want to talk a little bit about intermedia arts and the role that intermedia arts played for you as an artist and in your growth. Here on Sanctuary, we've been talking a lot about intermedia arts and the role that it played as a place where a lot of emerging artists were first able to make work, and talking a little bit about its closure and what that's meant for artists and the state of our current arts ecology in terms of supports for emerging artists. So I wanted to ask you, what were among the first experiences you had at intermedia arts, and what was it for you?
Right. And I mentioned a little bit about my first experience, but I wanted to reveal a little more details about it. My first experience was attending a spoken word after school class, which was taught by Desdemona, right? And I was actually, it was a class for youth, and the reason why I laughed a little bit is I actually attended as a college student, and I wasn't within the age range of what they were looking for. But Desdemona was like, it's okay, you could be in the class, just because it was a small class anyways. And so my best friend Pete and I, who were both in, a college course together, we both attended this spoken word class. And then we got to showcase our poems that we wrote from this class. And that was my first experience performing on Intermedia's Black Box stage, right? And I remember that evening, another poet performed, Ibe Kaba, who became a great friend of mine eventually. And we shared stages together many times, as well as sharing stages with Desdemona eventually after that experience too. I thought that really introduced me and connected me to these amazing and influential artists, and I didn't know how great they were at the time. I just met them. And my second experience was being invited by Marlena Gonzalez, who worked there at the time, and she saw us perform at that Pangea World Theater showcase for Voices of Exile, and she immediately invited my grandma and I to perform for another showcase at Intermedia, and I don't remember the exact name of it, but yeah, that was a great experience. And that was where I also saw Grandma be embraced by the Twin Cities arts community. I guess Pangea was the first time, and then that was like a continuation, I should say, through intermedia arts. And I've performed and attended shows countless times after that. And after my grandma passed, we actually had a tribute show at Intermedia, and this was in 2017, the year she passed. We had a tribute show where artists came to honor Grandma, artists that knew her and wanted to pay their respects, did it through their music or their poetry or just revealing stories about Grandma. And so that came full circle, I would say, before Intermedia ended. And so I would and I should say I was a part of the Creative Community Leadership Institute, CCLI, that was based in Intermedia too. So I do have a lot of experiences and connections with Intermedia. I probably have more, but those are the ones I can think of for now. It was an amazing arts resource and created this network of artists from many different cultures and generations and genres. It's just so many memories. I remember attending B Girl B there. I remember one of the Twin Cities hip hop festivals was hosted there. So in any case, I just remembered another one. So a film that I was a part of called We Rock Long Distance was premiered at Intermedia Arts. The filmmaker Justin Shell, which featured Maria Issa, Manifest, and I in 3 different parts of the world that were filmed us doing hip hop in Ghana, Puerto Rico, and Thailand. And we premiered that film at Intermedia Arts too. So it was definitely a space for various genres of arts. Yeah, and of course I think the community that was supported and the community that emerged through Intermedia Arts is still mourning its closing. Yes.
I'm wondering if you feel that there are spaces that have reemerged to take up some of the loss of what Intermedia Arts has been to this community, or if there are perhaps new organizations that are emerging in its wake that you think offer some of the same supports. And I think the larger question that I'm wondering about, and that we've talked about here on Sanctuary in past shows, is what does it mean to thrive in this current creative economy? What does it mean to thrive? And what kind of supports are artists needing to continue to work?
Just to address the first question about organizations, I feel like many organizations take up various aspects of what Intermedia Arts did. From what I know, I don't think there's an organization that replicates everything that Intermedia Arts did. But there's, pieces of inspiration that have spread throughout the Twin Cities, right? So, some organizations that I've been connected to and involved with that give me that feeling is Indigenous Roots on the east side, St. Paul. They have that, amazing Cypher Side dance program through my friend Lou. But, Marianne and that crew have created an amazing resource too for a lot of artists, and being that it's in St. Paul too, it gives that type of feel. I think more recently I've connected to the Cedar Art Center and I know there's been some changes there, but there's also been programs that especially giving opportunities with like East African artists also that are happening there that are pretty exciting, and some global roots type programming that's going on. Those are the two organizations that come up for now.
Sure.
I'm sure there's a lot more that I feel bad about not remembering at the moment. But yeah, so I think like going back to I think, well, there's In Progress too in St. Paul, which does media arts and has a music studio too. But in any case, I'm sure there's other organizations that I can't think of at the moment, but a lot of the artists that came through Intermedia during that time, I feel like they've carried their own type of influence, and that's been shared through whether it's programs or other organizations that they've worked in. I would say they carry that influence that they've had through Intermedia. A friend of mine, Missy Whiteman, who is a media-based artist, you know, she had a very strong connection to Intermedia. She travels and works with communities all over the United States, different reservations, different states, and she definitely carries that influence through Intermedia with her, for example. Yeah. So the second question, you have to remind me what it was again.
What does it mean to you to thrive in our current moment?
It's a good question. That is a very good question, because I feel every artist has their own, I guess, way of thriving, right? One is, you know, you're just getting a lot of like maybe media-based recognition or you know, being featured through whether it's like different media outlets, radio shows, getting a lot of performance gigs, and I think, or maybe getting even more national attention too, right? So that's one way. Another is really connecting to community in a way where they're really bringing inspiration to different neighborhoods in the Twin Cities through their arts. And I think for me, that's a way of thriving also, you know, working in the schools, continuing to perform, but then inspiring a new generation of artists at the same time. I think that's something that's really special about the Twin Cities arts community, is that there are artists that have inspired and mentored other artists who have thrived and became their own prominent artists, who then return and mentor their artists. So I've seen a lot of generations of artists in that way, and I think that's something really special, that to see someone I've mentor another artist, and then that artist mentors another artist. You know, I feel like there's a lot of that going on, honestly, with some of my peers too. They have different generations of artists that they've mentored, and so I think that is something that we do, each one teach one, which is a value of hip-hop.